Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. If you've ever thought there just aren't enough rock and roll bands out there who make me want to release my pent-up energy, then you need to set your sights towards New Zealand and check out the D4. Around the turn of the century, the D4 were one of the more prominent rock outfits emerging from New Zealand, with debut album 620 arriving as an all-killer, no-filler example of what the band do best. Before long, they were a bit of a sensation around the world, with the group even managing to make their way onto US TV with a spot on The Late Show with David Letterman, though famously Letterman himself was off that night. Following a few more years of shows and music, the D4 called it quits around 2006, waving goodbye with their Out of My Head album the year prior. Since then, members have gone on to other projects, with vocalist and guitarist Jimmy Christmas forming the likes of Luger Boa and Jet Generations. A few years ago, the D4 got back together for some shows, making their way down to Australia in 2023, where my band actually supported them in Melbourne, and now they're coming back again for a run of East Coast shows. This week, Jimmy was kind enough to join me on the podcast to chat about the band's history and their rise to fame. Anyway, I strongly urge you to check out the D4's exceptional back catalogue, and once you're done giving that a spin, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Jimmy Christmas, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, Tyler.
So for those who don't recognise your name, could you give me a quick few words on who you are and why we're chatting today?
So I am the co-founder, co-guitarist, co-singer, co-frontman of a band called the D4, a garage rock and roll outfit formed in New Zealand late 90s. And we had a bit of a wild run through that early 2000 period. Went on hiatus middle of the 2000s, but then I picked it up again recently, and so we're coming back to Australia for our first visit, East Coast proper tour for 20 years. We used to have a good time kicking around Australia, so we're very much looking forward to coming back.
Because the last time you were in Australia, I think, was 2023. You only did this, I think, the only one I know of is Melbourne, because I actually briefly met you then because my band Dental Plan supported you at that show. For me, it's actually only the second show I'd played with that band. And just seeing you guys play, it just blew my mind. And it just made me want to be a better musician as well, which is one of the reasons I'm very glad to actually be having a chat with you today, because I'd like to be able to pick your brain about, your style of music, really. But I guess before we actually sort of get into that, what I love to do with these podcasts is sort of go back in time to where a love of music first formed. So for you, Jimmy, do you have a recollection of your earliest memory of when music first resonated with you?
Yeah, I've got a pretty fond memory of my parents had a really good record collection, quite eclectic, and then they had a really good vinyl setup and a really awesome pair of Philips headphones, I think, that I remember spending a lot of time underneath. There's a lot of Meatloaf and Queen and Springsteen, Stones, Beatles, that sort of stuff. So it was pretty cool. I also had the War of the Worlds double album, which I really loved that record. But I always had to finish it. I had I think it was 4 records, right? 4 sides. I had to wait for the aliens to die at the end. I couldn't go to sleep if the aliens were still in charge of the Earth.
You always did a closure with the music, yeah.
So I guess that set me on my way of being a completist. I like to listen to records, how they were made, from the start to finish. I'm still very much connected to that process. I like the way that artists make albums. So I'm very much an album guy rather than a single guy, I think. And then growing up, had a babysitter when I was very young who had a compilation of some Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Sabbath stuff that was exposed to me, which sort of freaked me out in a really good way, and set me on my path.
I also feel as though no one ever just sort of, discovers bands like, Black Sabbath, for example, in like a nice casual way. It's usually sort of like passed down, and it's usually some sort of semi-traumatizing experience with like, what the hell is this? And then later on, they're actually like, you know what? This is actually quite inoffensive in the grand scheme of things, but it's still formative and mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like it's a rite of passage. And then I suppose when you've got people that are really passionate about music, or music excites them, when they have these these special moments or special sounds or things that artifacts, I guess, sonic artifacts that they want to expose and share, which is a really great process. And it's funny because it sort of happens in stages. I just remember that period of like, as so many of us have had, where you suddenly get more and more exposed. It was pre-internet days, and it was pre Spotify, YouTube, and stuff. So you sort of got exposed to complete albums sort of arrived at the record store, and suddenly that was your new favorite band. I know that a friend of mine was working in a record shop, and someone gave him a dub cassette of Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction about a year and a half, 18 months before it arrived or was released officially in New Zealand. I just remember that being a really exciting time, this unmarked cassette full of this insane music that just felt real special and wild, and just was that incredible lift, and then kicking on to the next one, a new discovery and a new discovery. It was a real exciting phase of life.
Yeah, like there was something I was actually chatting with someone about only a couple of days ago, just talking about how back then music discovery was such a you had to put in the hard yards to do it, whereas these days it's sort of just like it's a YouTube link that's being sent or a Spotify playlist. But back then it was much more of a communal experience as well. It was someone handing you like a cassette or a CD a bit later on, and you really had to sort of try hard, or as you said before, sort of like listen to the record in full and sort of experience it rather than just hearing it piecemeal.
We make each
And
other compilations. I mean, that's
yeah,
kind of the thing. Is so you'd have a bunch of stuff, and you'd make a compilation for someone. Go, hey, these are all the things that I'm really into. Check this cassette out. I've made this for you. Here you go. Really good thing for girls, I guess, at that time as well. When you're trying to impress girls. But you're right. It's like I can remember, writing off to into a magazine to order a catalog version of Dirk Wears White Socks by Adam and the Ants, and having that come in the post and the cassette, and being very excited by that whole process. Yeah, it's
so
about organic process.
so just when you're mentioning like making cassettes for folks as well, do you like a lot of people would always sort of lean back on one specific track as a great opener for a mixtape? Did you have any specific killer opener?
Mm. Maybe I think when I sort of was getting a bit more active in that and trying to spread the word of this sort of crazy punk thing I discovered, it was probably Orgasmatic by the Buzzcocks. Would kick that off.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant choice. And actually, I was hoping I had a nice little segue there to go to my next question, which was, for you going from this sort of period of like, hearing music, discovering music, when did that love of music transform into actually playing music? When did you pick up an instrument?
It was about 13, 14. I tried to play the guitar, electric guitar, but I didn't have a very good guitar, and I wasn't very patient. And I think we're trying to learn. I was approaching it in the wrong way, I think. Like I kind of find myself with no real guidance or mentors. So I was trying to learn tablature, and I was trying to play along to things, and it didn't really connect until a little while later. I'm trying to think of the process, but I picked up a bass guitar, and I found the bass guitar a lot more satisfying and simple for a hack to sort of get going, and then realized that I could find the root notes and start playing along with things, and it wasn't all that complicated as I thought. Keen on singing and performing. In fact, when I joined when we first, well, I didn't join, but when we first established the D4, we had another rhythm guitar player, and I wasn't really playing much guitar at all. But that didn't work out, so it was suggested that maybe I'd pick up that role. And that was kind of where it started, really, and where we are now.
Yeah, so you haven't looked back since, and it's obviously served you pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm I wouldn't say I'm a virtuoso. I'm very much in the Malcolm Young school of guitar playing. I decided that's where I was going to go. I didn't have the patience for lots of scale work and shredding and stuff. I like to sing, so I wanted to be occupied on doing that. And then I decided that being in the pocket was the right thing for me. So I've got a few licks and up my licks and tricks up my sleeves, but very light digging in and laying down that rhythm track.
Of course. And I mean, you obviously mentioned like the likes of Malcolm Young there. So, like, were there any particular musicians that when you were sort of like really getting into the guitar side of things, you were always looking up to? Because you're obviously saying that you're not a big shredder or something, but I often find that the rhythm guitarists are heavily overlooked. And I say this as a rhythm guitarist in my band as well. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously Malcolm, Steve Jones, Johnny Thunders, those sort of um, intentional players, which sort of I felt that I could connect with. They weren't these sort of out of sight super guys that were, incredibly gifted. They just looked like guys. I mean, Johnny Thunders. I'm not saying these guys aren't gifted, because of course they were, but it just seemed attainable. Like the way that they played. It was about the way that they felt about the chords. It wasn't the notes. It was so much as just you know, the intention and the groove, and there's sort of the looseness within the tightness.
right, yeah,
Sense,
no, that makes a lot of sense.
being
Yeah,
able to wrestle with that particular avenue and that particular approach. Um, how do you get that sort of flawed? I've always been, a lot of my heroes are really flawed. I really like that nature of the light and dark that runs through the heart of every man. And so yeah, I've always been enamored of that sort of style of guitar playing too.
yeah. Going back to when you first, like, really sort of first flourished as a musician. So tell me, how did the D4 sort of really first form? How did you guys come together and say, we're making a band, it's going to be called the D4, let's go?
Yeah, so stepping back a little bit from that, so as I was sort of getting into music, one of my favorite bands, of course, was the Buzzcocks. It just absolutely blew my mind. And so one day I was at my best friend's house, not a musical guy, but my best buddy, and his sister had a cassette of the Buzzcocks in her room, which made no sense to me. I said, "What the fuck you got? Why is this in your room? What is this? How do you have this?" Knowing that it wasn't of any interest. She goes, "Oh, this is my boyfriend Paul's cassette." I was like, "I gotta meet your boyfriend Paul," and so I did meet her boyfriend Paul, and Paul was playing in a band called Nothing at All with Dion. Um, Dion Lunadon, who's my buddy in the D4, and Tony Brockwell. And they were doing stuff that I really wanted to be doing. I was really impressed with what they were up to, how they were approaching it. They were wild, they were young, they were intense. Their songwriting was awesome. They were informed by all the things that informed me. So they were part of working with a collective called Frisbee, which involved a lot of other amazing bands, and I encourage listeners to investigate what came out of the Frisbee stable in that sort of late 90s, early 2000s period, because it's pretty amazing. Orchestrated by a couple of key players, Bob Frisbee, John Baker was there, and so I started glomming onto that environment because I was very attracted to what that scene was happening. It was very DIY, very punk ethic. Everybody swapped gear, swapped band members. It was very fresh and very different to everything that was happening around. It was the antithesis of what was happening on the radio. It felt exciting and like a real discovery. So I started hanging around there. Eventually formed a band. I was in a band with Paul Foster called A Bit Off, punk rock singing, and Dion was in another band called Snitches that lost some momentum, or he got kicked out, I think. And then we met each other at a party. We're talking at a party. Dion had some songs, I had some intention. We got together and we started working it out. I've still got the demo cassette that he gave me of his 4-track, couple of his demos. And then and that's where we began. And I think it was a meeting of mind and talent. Like Dion and I have got a really compatible style. Like he's really intense and aggressive, and I really like that. I'm probably a little bit more melodic in other areas, and that works well. And we complemented each other, I think, in a really, really good way, and developed partnership, and then brought on some really great players. Beaver Pooley being another one. Jake, who's the original bass player, playing with us now, was at the start. Then we had a guy called Vaughan Williams who's with us for many years. And so I think the thing with Dion and I was just the intention and the work ethic, and wanting to get out of New Zealand and go and see what we can do with it. And we were fortunate that our timing was right, and things started happening, and we had a good bunch of people around us, and here we are.
Yeah. So when you guys actually formed, like, was there a specific sort of, I guess, sound that you did have in mind? Because, like the bands, like especially the early stuff, it's very straight up balls to the wall sort of rock. So what was the plan? Was it just to sort of rock as hard as possible, or was it just to sort of get together, complement your like melodic sort of tendencies with like Dion's aggressive style, and just sort of see what comes from that?
Yeah, I think it's more objectively or retrospectively that I sort of analyze how that sort of stuff happened. I think very much at the time we were just doing it. What do you got? Got a riff? Got an idea? Cool, that's great. I can sing this on that. Oh, this is good. What about, here's my riff. What can you do? Oh, that's good. Let's just do that. And so it just came together because we're pushing the same direction. I mean, the sound was dictated by the equipment that we were using and the bands that we were listening to. So it was always going to be punk rock and roll, and a lot of old valve amps, New Zealand made valve amps, Holdens and Jansons, and the equipment that was around us. So that sort of gave it a tone. That our first album, 620, is named after the Janson 620 amps that we used to record it, which I felt like gave it. We were very influenced. We wore our influences on our sleeves, no doubt. However, I think that New Zealand's isolationism and the specific equipment we were using allowed it to be a thing that had its own uniqueness, or it was a progression in a different way based on where we were at the time we were at.
I remember years ago, I was briefly dating a girl who was actually from Hamilton. So me being from Australia, dating a girl from Hamilton, long distance relationship and everything. But I remember like speaking to folks in her family and sort of being like, look, me being Australian, tell me about all the New Zealand artists out there. And I remember her stepfather, he was just like, okay, 3 names you need to hear. You need to hear She Had. I'm like, okay, obviously. He was also like, I mean, I think he was mentioning Dave Dobbin as well. I was like, yeah, okay, not quite, not quite my speed. He was like mentioning like the Feelers as well. And then he was also like, and the D4 is a band you definitely need to hear. And that wasn't the first time I'd heard of you guys, but it was nice to actually hear that, it was just hearing this sort of confirmation that, oh, my sense of what's going on in New Zealand is correct. It's hearing this sort of thing. And that's something that always sort of just made me start thinking, when did things start taking off for you guys? When did people really start noticing? Because the first album was out in 2001. That was via Flying Nun, I believe.
Yeah. So the first, we released an EP in 1998.
Yeah.
A guy called Paul McKesser was a fan of the band, and he asked us if we wanted to do an EP. We said we wanted to do an EP, so that was awesome. That was the D4 EP, 4-track thing that came out on Flying Nun, and that led on to the album, also on Flying Nun around 2000 in New Zealand, and then came out sort of worldwide. But I think you got to go back, like back it up a little bit. There's a couple of things that kind of happened that made big influences on what was going to happen from that period for us and others. I think my personal experience, like a real instrumental night when the Helicopters came to town, maybe 99, maybe. And we were there, we opened for them, and the Dadsons were a band called Trinket at the time, playing out of Hamilton. And the Helicopters, and John Baker would have brought them down, but the Helicopters just flipped a switch in New Zealand about intensity and, sonic raw power. I think they sort of blew through New Zealand and left a mark. And then we had other bands that were being brought down by, John, like Dead Moon did the same. Really important. Guitar Wolf did the same. So I think we were being visited by these really inspiring, chaotic, high energy, very self-determined DIY, single-minded, focused rock and roll bands that allowed us to understand what was possible. I think beyond, the likes of, say you referenced the Feelers, but the Feelers, a lot of this stuff was very informed by commercial radio. And we weren't informed by commercial. We hated commercial radio. It was, as I said, it was everything we didn't want to be. we didn't want to be on those radio stations initially, But obviously, BFM was a fantastic outlet for us. The student radio networks played eclectic stuff, so there was a place for our stuff to get on the radio, which was a pretty exciting feeling the first time you experienced that. And so I think that those bands really lit a fire under a lot of us and allowed us to sort of push on. And then a real defining moment was John Baker. I was working at the telephone company, I remember. John Baker came and said to us, there's this festival in America called South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, where it's a real, you guys should play there. All these lots of great bands, rock and roll bands play there. You should play there. And this is like quite early, and I don't know how long the festival has been going, but it's pretty early in the process. This is around 2000. So us and the Datsons applied to go to South by Southwest by fax, I think. And we've got booked for South by Southwest. So we freighted all our gear over to Texas, and then arrived through LA pretending to be other people, just so that, because we had no visas, I couldn't afford visas. And then we picked it up in Austin, and that was an incredible adventure up through North America. We had booked, we'd done a cover of a band, another really amazing band that influenced us was a band called the Devil Dogs out in New York City in the 90s. Again, just raw, high energy, super rock and roll. And, the recordings just sizzle, man. And we had done a cover of a song called North Shore Bitch, actually, which we probably wouldn't recover this time and these days. But we sent it to the guy, and he said, I love it. And on 7-inch, he said, if you come to America, I'll book you some shows. So his name's Steve Bass, and he's a bass player, and he was up in Virginia, so he booked us 3-4 shows in Virginia, which was so Austin to Virginia, and then there was all this space in between, and so we just hired a van and drove. But after the festival, we'd met a band called the Deadly Snakes, who we then crossed paths with in another town as they were making their way back north. They were a Canadian rock and roll band that we really liked and became friendly with. And they said, well, why don't you go to this venue called the Limelight or the Lamplight or something in this town, and just tell them that you're friends of us, and maybe they'll you could play there. So that's kind of what we did then. So we went to this venue and said, hey, we're the D4 from New Zealand. Can we play tonight? We'll just do 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. Would that be okay? And people would say, yeah, sure. And we haven't got any backline, so can we borrow your backline? And yep, no problem. And then that led on to another one. Oh, well, you should go to this town. You should go to Raleigh in North Carolina and tell them that the Cherry Valance sent you, and that so we ended up. That was a really memorable one, because we arrived in this band called All Night that were doing their album release party at this venue, maybe 250 people capacity. And we arrived, and there was them, and there was a touring band from LA, and it's the same spiel, can we play? And they said, yeah, no problem. And we asked the opening band, can we borrow your gear? And they weren't into it at all, They didn't like it, didn't like the sound of that. And so the main act said, fuck it, you can use our gear. So why don't you just go on after them and before us? Just play 20 minutes before we came on. So we got to stand up to this full house and say, hey, surprise, we're from New Zealand with the D4. It's just been popped up here, so hey, we're going to give you 20 minutes. Boom. That was insane. And then that continued up into North Carolina through to Virginia Beach, where we met probably the scariest and realest and coolest band I've seen, called the Candy Snatchers. We played with in a crazy little venue there, which was just absolute riotous, glass breaking, full of cigarette smoke, people throwing stuff, yelling at us, then buying all our merch, abusing us because we didn't have enough merch to sell them.
Nice problem to have, really, isn't it?
It was pretty eye opening for a sort of young, innocent band from New Zealand. We were learning pretty fast, and we got there. And then what had happened in the interim? Paul McKesser, the guy had signed us to Flying Nun, had gone to the UK and started work with a crowd called Infectious Records, and he signed us to Infectious Records, and our first single came out there, Rock and Roll Motherfucker, and we got to the top of America, and they said, do you want to come and open for Fu Manchu on a national tour in the UK? So we just didn't go home, and that's kind of how it kept going really for the next few years.
Yeah, I should say, speaking of, international in the next few years, one thing I do have to mention is the appearance on The Late Show with with
Mm.
David Letterman in theory. So it's already rare enough to have that on your resume, but more so you've got that rare experience of being the musical guest on an episode with Bill Cosby of all people. So firstly, that's incredibly weird, but how was that experience for you? Not just sort of like now, but I guess in hindsight, and also being able to be on American TV as well. That must be a huge platform for a band like you guys.
Yeah, it was insane that booking. I think it was on the time our album had been, it was the release date of this album. Hollywood Records had pushed us in the States, and it was an interesting fit. It was awesome that we got this big record contract, and then we've been, we had done really well at student radio, and then they were trying to cross us over onto mainstream radio and stuff. And there's some other stuff around how that was being marketed. We were playing with bands that we really liked and respected, and then the Hollywood's marketing team would plaster the venue with pictures of us, which felt like a bit weird and uncomfortable. I do remember going to one venue and us running around the venue pulling down our home pictures because it just felt like we're on the bill with these other bands that are established and like we respected and part of our sort of our peers, and we kind of were feeling a bit uncomfortable with how sort of Hollywood the whole sort of American marketing push was. So that was interesting and sort of ended up with some other challenges, but they got us onto the Letterman show, which I'm always be grateful because it was insane. We were staying at the time on Times Square. We were arriving in a limousine. We're playing the Ed Sullivan Theatre, which is where so many people have played. The Beatles, Elvis. Like wow, like you can't probably get deeper into the heart of that cultural empire. I felt for that. So that was quite a surreal experience to look around and find ourselves there. I mean, it's also shot in the afternoon, so the audience are quite reserved, and it's but really incredibly professionally made, and they were really welcoming. Sounded great. I thought the YouTube clips up there, I thought we did a good job of what we were there to do. So the evidence speaks for itself, I think, in that regard. But Bill Cosby was that, like, yeah, having watching the Cosby Show as a kid. Then there I was with Bill Cosby. That was quite interesting. And then him, then me being personally fucked off by him because he didn't introduce our band.
Yeah, that has always struck me as so weird because he was like pretending to be asleep or something like that.
Yeah, but he roofied himself, eh? I think something like that. It's pretty funny. Like it's all in retrospect. It's all pretty outrageous. But he was doing a shtick that he'd run through that show where he was, hosting it, but like he didn't know what he was doing. Whatever the fuck he thought he was doing, it wasn't funny. But it didn't help us when our big moment comes and he just holds up a cue card with red writing on it. I mean, who's reading that? So, but we didn't have time to think about it. I mean, I guess what I do regret is that I didn't think to announce us before we started, but it was all, like that's a like they're going, shit, I should have said we are the D4 from New Zealand before we started, but it was all like, go,
Yeah. We say, thanks, Bill, I'll take it from here.
You know what I mean? So maybe a wiser, sort of more relaxed Pit me might have dealt with that situation a little bit better. But but then they had personal beef with the cause, so that was pretty funny.
I mean, these days many people do, so you're a bit of a trailblazer in that sense.
Yeah, I knew it was wrong.
So the D4 ended up sort of taking a bit of a hiatus around 2006. So what was it that necessitated that?
We had finished the second record and that had not been picked up by America, and they kind of fucked us around but and killed our momentum. They were trying to get a song away on mainstream radio, big rock radio. Whereas I think a lot of our appeal and why we got to where we got was the sort of rawness and the energy of the original recordings, and so they had us re-record Heartbreaker, and we had a good time doing it. We come off tour, flew into Sound City Studios, so we got to muck around on that desk, so that's the studio where obviously Rumours was made and Nirvana playing, and you've got bullet holes where Charles Manson tried to shoot his tapes out of his, so again,
precious memories.
You know what I mean? Again, like, I'm not, I'm not under any apprehension of the enormous opportunities we had to really connect to these iconic things and pieces and places, and that desk, which is now, I guess, Dave Grohl's got that desk, right? And he had that big documentary about it. So we I pushed the buttons on that and played with that and recorded myself, our band through that. So that's cool. And so we ran around in that studio and had a really good time re-recording it. We rearranged it a little bit. There was a big American producer that jumped on. I think they probably spent more money on that single than the whole, first album. And we thought we did a good job. And then we heard it. They said, give us a CD, and he just mixed it like this big rock thing with treated vocals and the whole thing. It's just, I mean, we don't own a copy of that CD because we threw it out the roof of the bus, like in disgust.
Yeah.
And none of us have that recording, which is funny. Maybe one day I can find it, but we don't have it because it was just we were affronted by it, and then of course it didn't work because it wasn't real. I think it was a wrong thing. So I guess I'm digressing, but that had sort of, and then the second album was then sort of held at bay, and they didn't want to take it, but they didn't release it so that we could go and shop it somewhere else while we had momentum, So they just held it and held it and held it and held it, and it sort of just. And we tried writing new songs. We were recording stuff, which is some of the stuff we'll be playing on this tour. The sort of third album things and bits and bobs and stuff like that. So we were working on it, but eventually it just kind of ran out of steam. And then I think Dion talks about we did a tour around New Zealand and we were playing with some bands that we weren't particularly enamored with, and it was just like, I don't know. I think this has kind of run its course for now. We had lost a bit of energy. I think, looking back, could have done it differently. Could have moved the whole band offshore. Again, could have taken a break at a time to regalvanize and revitalize. Could have stood our guns, and said, no, the second single is going to be this, and this is how we want to do it. But I know why we made the decisions we made at the time, and we thought we were doing the right thing. And hey, that's where we are. So I think it was a really intense period of constant touring and working and going. So just to sort of be a step back and have a breather, it was really good for Dion and I's relationship too. I think we could sort of appreciate what we'd achieved and also relate to each other without having massive daily expectations on each other. So I really valued that, and that's really strengthened our relationship a lot.
Plus, then over the years, you guys have also worked in different projects as well. I mean, Dion ended up in A Place to Bury Strangers. You've had projects by the likes of, I'll make sure I get the names right. Is it Luger Boa? More recently, Generations.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I guess how did those feel compared to the D4? Because obviously the D4 would have been much more high profile. A lot of international touring and everything. These are obviously a little bit more subdued, but do they feel a bit more, I guess, real in a sense because they're a bit more, grounded, or is it apples and oranges really?
Yeah, apples and oranges, perhaps. I mean, I think Luger Boa was really freeing for me because it was a chance to sort of explore a more glam kind of big chorus, hooky character. D4 is very real. This is what we are. We are, like it's like as soon as we walk in the door, you know what you're getting with the D4. You know what it looks like. It feels like it's all pretty obvious. Luger Boa was a chance to sort of really explore a sort of more theatrical kind of Bowie-esque, Queenish kind of big production experiment, and see what that felt like. And I really enjoyed that for a couple of albums. I worked with a guy called Barry Palmer, another Palmer, funnily enough, a lot of Christmas Palmer compilations from the Hunters and Collectors. And and lots of great bands. But Barry and I had a really great working relationship, and we approached that in a much different way. So I was able to sort of get a riff going, get a vibe going, and then just freeform on the mic, like stream of consciousness, and then put it all back together and build it. Whereas that was quite different from the sort of recording live to tape approach of the D4. So it was freeing, and it did really quite well. It commercially did really well in New Zealand actually for that period. But it was when it was put together eventually as a live thing, it was a 5-piece rock and roll band with lots of moving parts, and it reached a point in New Zealand where the next step was to take it overseas, and the realities of supporting a 5-person rock and roll band overseas and starting that again. And I had a family and a mortgage. It just wasn't didn't it just wasn't going to go. So that was cool. So I did that and parked that, and then did other things.
And then I guess what inspired the decision to start playing shows with the D4 again? Like, where did that inspiration come from?
That main inspiration for that was 2018. So the a little bit earlier, but the story went out that the King's Arms Tavern had been sold and was going to be knocked down and replaced by apartment buildings. So the King's Arms Tavern, for those in the know or those not in the know, it's really central, Newton Gully in Auckland, oldest pub in the town in the city, and had been a stalwart of the music live scene for as long as I could remember, and way back to the turn of the century. So we had practice rooms right around the corner from King's Arms. We used to carry our equipment, sort of like the Tote, but bigger, but bigger and bit more garden bar-y kind of thing, but sort of so central and vital for the developing music scene, as a places to play when you're in your shitty $5 bands, and then also it could handle good international acts and put 400 or 500 people in there. I think the record, John Baker squeezed 800 in there for the 5, 6, 7, 8s, which is absolutely outrageous.
Like a fire hazard waiting to happen.
It wasn't repeated, but it was pretty wild. So it was a really integral part of our development personally and musically, and just life experience. So the D4 had some shows there. Like that's where we had our final shows when we split. When we went on hiatus. It's where we had the infamous show where the PA caught fire while we were playing, which was pretty awesome. So when we heard about it, D and I had not talked about playing again. He was busy with Places Very Strange, as I was doing Luger Boa. We had things going on. It just didn't really seem to make, how we would have that conversation. And I didn't know how he felt about it. And where he was at with his perspective on everything. But just when that popped up, I was just sort of rang him and said, "Hey, the King's Arms closing. I think if anyone should be playing there before it closes or closing, it should be us, right?" And he felt the same way about it. So we looked into it. And as luck would have it, Paul McKesser, who features heavily in the story, was booking bands for City Limits Festival in Auckland around that time. So he offered us a good start on the main stage for City Limits as a sort of a comeback thing, and and then offered us a fee, which meant that we could anchor the whole thing around it and make it happen and get Dion back and actually make a go of it. And so then, so we played the King's Arms again.
Amazing.
And then some shows around town, around the country while we were there, obviously.
Yeah. And then obviously now you've got these shows coming up in Australia, which I think like a lot of Australian fans are obviously very keen for it because, I like even before I really sort of before I got to see you guys and actually play a show alongside you guys, which is quite cool. Just like hearing folks talk about seeing the D4 like 20 years ago or something. It was almost like one of those things. It was sort of like those shows that just get talked about in the front bar of like the Tote or something. It's sort of like, oh, do you remember seeing the D4 back then? And people are like, oh, if you weren't there, you don't know, sort of thing. And so I can imagine that that's it must be it's quite a good feeling for yourself as well to sort of have that a sort of reputation.
We really owe Australia a lot, Again, I mean, we when we went to Australia, we had some fucking crazy times, particularly in Melbourne, and again, it's like I just remember that introduction into we knew a bit about the bands that we cared about out of Australia, Fun Things and Saints and all, Birdman, all of that stuff. We knew what informed us from there. But then we sort of showed up, and I remember people giving me cassettes of the Powder Monkeys and, Spencer Jones and Last Gasp, and same thing, that cassette, hey, check this out. I was like, fuck, I thrashed that. And when I look back, we played a gig at the Corner Hotel, and it was Powder Monkeys, the Onyas. I think it's on the wall actually at the Tote, that particular gig.
Yeah, because I was saying it's sounding familiar. Just when actually, I'm just looking it up now. I think Warped were on there as well.
Yeah, it was a pretty incredible lineup actually. So it was just really great to be able to, be part of that, what was the heart of the Melbourne kind of rock and roll scene,
Mm.
with iconic bands that have informed so many more people, through that environment. And we had an amazing time. Like, I think that was the first time as well we were able. Melbourne was really healthy then. I'm sure it is now, but we were able to play 5 shows in 5 days within 5 kilometers of each other. Which was just unheard of for us in New Zealand. We had people kind of following us from gig to gig. And it was sort of building as we went. So it was really crazy. And we were staying at a mad backpackers on Brunswick Street, where we were getting attacked by, some dude who was iced up and crazy and trying to throw down out of a window. And
Brunswick Street is still like that, actually. So
so yeah, we were living it. It was pretty cool. It felt very real, very fun, and very unpredictable.
actually, just looking at that poster, I think the headlining band was a Board as well.
That was the one. Yeah, I was just having a brain.
Yeah, I was too busy reading the smaller print to look at the larger band up there. So I guess with these new shows in recent years and everything, and like you mentioned before, like the third album, could we ever get another D4 album? What do you reckon? Sporadic shows like this is the best we can hope for, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't know. We went up to Japan in October. We got called up to Japan to go play a festival by Seiji from Guitar Wolf, and then put some other shows on. And so that was our first full trip back to Japan for 20 years. So that was great. So I think the boys are into experiences. We consider that sort of stuff a gift. Don't take it for granted at all. An opportunity to do that. Whether or not there is an album, there's probably already an album written. That and maybe we could go somewhere and record it. I don't know. I think we're just kind of kicking it as it goes, and is it fun? Do people care? Do we care? And at the moment, it is like that. Like it's a chance to hang out with people I really love, play some music that we did some good music, and there's a couple of new things that we're doing on this particular tour of songs we never played live before. So it's a bit more of a musical challenge, which was something I think that we all needed to re-inject. I rang Beaver yesterday actually with an idea for a song that I just sort of had some lyrical inspiration and was behind some guy in traffic, and so I don't know. I think there's no demands on it, but who knows? Watch this.
It's completely fair. I mean, it's a sort of thing where you definitely don't want to push things if it's not going to feel natural as well. As long as you're as long as you're enjoying playing the shows, that's what matters the most, isn't it?
I'm looking forward to the shows. We took on board the promotion side of things this time. Like the last tour we did here was we had a promoter who did a great job, and that was cool. I was busy working. This time I thought, I'd lost sort of had some time, and I thought, me and Dion can organise it, and save on promoters fees. Far out, man. It's like worn me out. Like just all the actual machinations of getting this tour together has been a slog. Bands pulling out of things not working, booking this, booking that, blah, 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 blah. You know all about what it is to set up a gig and stuff.
It's a headache, isn't it?
On the scale. So that's so to my point there is I'm really looking forward. The tour starts Friday, so I'm actually about to leave to go to after this. I'm going to go to a rehearsal with Dion, the first rehearsal with Dion back in the country. Mm-hmm. So that's cool. So that'll feel like we're actually doing it now rather than talking about when we're going to do it and how it's going to be done. I think it's slipping into the next gear, which is right. We've done all that now. Let's get on with it. And I really like that phase, actually. It's happened a few times recently with me and D. Like, we do all the business and we're on to each other again about, have you done this? Have you got that? Where are you going to do this? Where are you going to do that? Who are we talking to? What's this? What are we going to do? All right, we got the gear, backline, blah, blah, blah. To the point we're going, it's done. All right. Let's get on with like what is the point of all of this? Right. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, I guess in the interest of actually making sure you can get to rehearsal on time, I should get down to this final section of the podcast. So, trusty chords, it's a bit of a gimmick. It sees me follow the 1, 3, and 5 structure of a standard chord. So I ask you about one artist that has impacted you, 3 albums you've been influenced by, and 5 songs you can always turn to. And these albums and songs don't need to be by your one artist either. So it's a bit wordy, but my first question for you here, Jimmy, who is the one artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
I'd like to say something, wild and out of the box. I'm going to go David Bowie. I think that I was turned on to David Bowie's back catalogue at a point in my life that I really needed it. and there was light from the dark, and there was, it was sort of beauty and emotional, and it hit me right at the time I needed something to connect to, and I think there's a lot to connect to in David Bowie.
There is so much to connect. I mean, there's so many different eras. There's like, like his Berlin period. It's got there's like his 80s or his somewhat overlooked 80s period.
Yeah,
It's just there's so much, isn't there?
yeah, there's a lot, and I really love. I mean, Space Oddity even before that, but maybe Hunky Dory's maybe my favorite record. I'm not sure. It's like there's just so much of it. I just listen to it so much and so often, and I think also that I respect the way that he went about his career. And when he died, like he'd released the Black Star record, and I hadn't really known the story about it. That obviously he knew he was dying, and this was his last body of work, and he went out on his terms. And I was actually on the Coromandel. I was playing cricket on the backyard with the kids, and my wife and family members were sort of watching, having a one, and the news came out, and they were like, "Oh my God!" And I was like, What's that? What are you talking about?" David Bowie's died." No, that's not true. And and I went inside and checked the internet, and of course, like first of all, it was like rumor, like false news. And I was like, oh, but then obviously it transpired that it wasn't false news. And so we brought down two vehicles to the Coromandel, and so I was driving home by myself basically. So I went and got the Black Star record, which I had yet to get from the local town, and drove home just listening to it on repeat. It was about a 6-hour journey, and just in floods, and it was a real cathartic kind of experience, and a real amazing to be able to listen to somebody saying goodbye through that. Yeah, so
Yeah, actually, I seem to remember, and I may have my date slightly wrong, but from memory, he actually passed away on the day of my grandfather's funeral,
yeah,
and it was this like weird sort of like feeling of emotion. But I think his passing was one of the few celebrities I've actually sort of shed a tear over, because it was just such an immense body of work. And then, I mean, even some of his duds. I mean, what's that one song, "The Laughing Gnome" or something like that?
yeah,
I mean, even that's not bad, but it's not the
uh,
sort of it's not the sort of thing you exactly chuck on at a party or something. But
yeah,
it's amazing how missed he is as well.
yeah. And for me, that formative period of my life, teenager music, art, realizing all that sort of stuff, it was such a touchstone for me. So yeah, I've really felt the loss of that thing. And I like that meme that goes around saying, of all the time in the, since the birth of the universe, and you were lucky enough to be alive with David Bowie.
Mm, yeah, it's the small things we can be grateful for, isn't it?
Yeah.
So my next question here is, what are the 3 albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums that you're always throwing on, or something that was integral to your musical evolution.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go with Singles Going Steady, Buzzcocks. Um, what else? Sad Wings of Destiny by Judas Priest. And third record, I'll go with the Sex Pistols, Never Mind Bollocks.
Yeah. I really enjoy the sort of like straight no, what's what I look for, like the sort of like real straight up and down rock aspect of all that. I mean, like you got the Buzzcocks, brilliant sort of brilliant band, and I mean Singles Going Steady, such a from the get go to the let go, full of greats. And Judas Priest, Sex Pistols, those albums are real sort of like great no skip records, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think Buzzcocks, I really like the melodic, just the style, those songs are incredible, power pop punk stuff. So sweet, beautiful, and edgy and wild. And I was lucky enough to meet Pete Shelley and interview him and talk with him and sing with the Buzzcocks and jump into the Buzzcocks changed my life. They were kind of also, there's so much of the stuff I'm thinking back now. Like when I was 17, I saw the Buzzcocks, and that was the real catalyst actually for me to go, I'm going to do this myself. Um, the Sex Pistols really good for me at a time when I was stomping around in my Dr. Martens, angry at everything, and put my headphones on and get out there and sort of was simple. And I guess it did that whole thing for me as it did for others at the time, going, you just need 3 chords and an attitude, and you can do it. And it's not about overblown high production stuff, and big opus stuff. It's just simple and attainable and cool. Um, and the Judas Priest record is probably my favorite record. It's my desert island disc at the moment. I quite often ask people, like, what you got to go now. Like, like the boat's leaving. You got one record to go. You can't think of it good. What is it? Grab it. Now. So for me, Judas Priest, Segments of Destiny, and I went to buy that. Like, I told you before about like a babysitter had this metal compilation, and I was decided that I liked heavy metal. So I went down to the record shop back in the day when they had, different sections, and then they just started into alternative music and metal music and stuff like that. And so I looked through and the Judas Priest song was Green Manalishi, like a cover they'd done of Fleetwood Mac's Green Manalishi. And there was Iron Maiden. There's all sorts of cool stuff on it. And so I wanted an Iron Maiden record originally, but I was quite young. And when I looked at, I think the record there was Live After Death, and it would just freak me out. The album artwork just did a little bit more than I was ready for. This is a bit freaky. I was quite young, and then there's just Judas Priest album and Segments of Destiny. So I bought that, and it wasn't at the time. I remember putting it on, thinking, this isn't metal. Like, what is this? Like, I don't know if I like this. That's what it did, but it wasn't quite. But over time, it's just become probably my favorite record of all time, for sure. And I can kick into that next song by start saying my favorite song is Victim of Changes by Judas Priest. It's just such a masterwork.
Well, I mean, that's a fairly good segue if we want to get into the 5 songs. So, I mean, if you want to pick up the Judas Priest one there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess also like 4 other songs as well. What else would be on that list?
What else would be on that list? All right. I'm going to say Back in the City by the Devil Dogs. I really like that. They're a rockin' band. That's representative of like all of their stuff, just sticking on. Jet Generation by Guitar Wolf. I think to me that also sums up Guitar Wolf. And I was, like Guitar Wolf's intent and their sound and their sonic, the squeal at the start and everything. And it's one of the only songs that just will still make me just want to punch the air. Like straight away, straight away. I can put that on anytime and I'm punching the air. So that's 3. I'm going to put a David Bowie track, and then I'm going to go for Unwashed and Somewhat Slightly Dazed.
Nice choice.
Yeah, just to something a little bit different, mixing it up now, I think. And I'm going to go, and then I think my last song is going to be a song called Tell Me Why by Kate McCartney, which is, I first heard it in a secondhand clothing shop in Japan. I was shopping around for stuff, and the song was playing. I was like, I have to know what this song is. And eventually they managed to communicate what it was. And I couldn't find it for ages, and I eventually tracked it down on the internet. It's on a Lovers Rock compilation. I'm not even sure the year, but Kate McCartney, Tell Me Why. It's just so sweet, and it's got a sweet groove and an incredible vocal line and a great tail, and just counterpoints, I guess, some of the chaos.
Yeah, because actually, as we speak, I'm looking it up now. I think that compilation's from 2003, by the looks of it. She seems to be a very very elusive figure in the world of music. There aren't too many releases with their name on it.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the only song I've heard. I haven't dug any deeper, to be honest. But I just, I think if anyone asks me for a track, go to that, and I can listen to that all day long.
Well, I'm very keen to check it out. That's one of the reasons I actually do this podcast as well. Is it just for the recommendations from people? Because there's like so often you just have like these sort of deep cuts from an album that you might have heard so often, but you've never appreciated it until you have someone say, oh, you need to check out this David Bowie track from this album. Like, oh, you know what? It's a really good one to check out. So
I'll tell you also, like, and just as a side, I know this is outside of the realms, but I'm really vibing on the Viagra Boys at the moment. They've just released a song called "Man Made of Meat." That's a great band. They are so cool.
Yeah, I definitely regret not seeing them when they were in Australia last year. Liam, our guitarist and singer in the band, he went and saw, and he was giving me like, at band practice, and like next day or something, he's like, "Oh, they were doing this," and I'm just like, "Oh, they count down the days till I actually see them."
They're really impressing me, and it's nice. It's nice to find something that like I found it I like, that guy, Justin Hawkins.
The Darkness, yeah?
Yeah, he does
Yeah.
this Justin Hawkins Rides Again
Yes.
podcast, channel.
Yep.
He's really good. I really like the way he goes about that. And anyway, he's quite good for sort of fresh stuff. Right? And anyway, I noticed that.
Yeah.
The other day. It's nice to find something new that you like.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful that I was able to get a few recommendations from yourself, Jimmy. So I guess I should, do the classic closing tagline where I say, Jimmy Christmas, I want to say thank you so very much for your time today, for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I'm glad we got to see each other.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you listened to this episode and enjoyed it, I would really appreciate it if you were able to take a few moments to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. As always, there's no obligation, but I'm forever grateful if you do because it really helps the reach of podcasts like this. As always, I'm over on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word, and I've got a blog on my website which is tylerjenke.com, that's TYLERJENKE/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. You probably know by now what you can find on the site, but you can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running if you feel so inclined. Lastly, I need to thank Jimmy Christmas for spending time with me this week for the podcast, and I also need to thank Niam from Lost Souls PR for helping organise this chat as well. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.